This is a game I've been eagerly awaiting ever since I first played Fallen Order when it came out almost 4 years ago now. The ending to Fallen Order left the door open for so much potential in a sequel and built a fantastic foundation that could be improved upon. In a lot of ways, Fallen Order felt like a successful experiment, blending multiple different designs and types of games into one relatively small package. All of that complemented by a fairly simple but great narrative, created one of the best Star Wars games of the last decade, and perhaps the best that EA has been able to put out since they got their exclusive licensing from Disney, but I'm sure that's debatable for some. Considering it was the same team and director in Stig Asmussen working on Survivor, I had no doubt it would be able to improve upon the foundation Fallen Order had built in every meaningful way. Survivor was among my most anticipated games of this year, and easily had Game of the Year potential for me. However, it's still not without its notable flaws. The biggest and most disappointing of which is the absolutely terrible performance. Chances are, if you've been following this game since its release, you know about its infamous PC launch and the abysmal performance of the game. I've heard it's better on consoles, still not great though, and I can confidently say I would have enjoyed my experience with this game 5 times more than I already did, if not for the poor frame rates. Now, like I said, I still did really enjoy this game, but it makes me wish I might have waited to play it. And it's really sad how often games launch with terrible performance issues, especially on PC, in recent years. Because this is a fantastic game that so many people won't get to enjoy or experience properly because of these issues. So for those of you who may be watching this video to decide whether or not you want to buy the game now, let me save you the time. I recommend waiting a few months or so, maybe longer, until all of these issues are ironed out. It's a great game, but it's hard to get this game to run well, even with a supercomputer, so I definitely recommend waiting. Now, the frame rate isn't always terrible. There's some planets and specific areas where the game runs well, usually when there's not so much in the distance or on screen, and when those smooth moments of gameplay happen, it feels like heaven, but there's a lot of areas where it doesn't run well. Ironically enough, I feel the area that was probably the worst was Coruscant at the beginning and a few areas in Kobo. It could get so bad, and while I wouldn't say it was completely unplayable, considering my PC specs, I probably shouldn't be having instances where the game drops to 20 to 30 FPS. So yeah, if you're thinking about playing this game in the future, I'd recommend waiting and checking back in to see if it's better in a few months, plus you might even catch it on a sale. Also, the rest of this video will contain full spoilers, as I'm going to talk about numerous parts of the gameplay and story, as this is a video intended for those who have finished Jedi Survivor. You've been warned. While I loved Jedi Fallen Order, the gameplay was a bit simple and a little underdeveloped in some areas. However, it set a great foundation that could be built upon, and that's exactly what Survivor did. If I had to give a comparison, it feels like the jump from God of War 2018 to Ragnarok, maybe even more so than that. There were so many nice changes and additions, big and small, that I feel does exactly what a sequel should. Anytime a large AAA series gets a sequel, I always see people complaining before the sequel comes out, saying things like, man, this sucks, it looks just like the first game, this looks like a DLC, they didn't change anything. Because I guess some people, for whatever reason, expect them to completely reinvent the wheel, even though everybody loved the gameplay from the previous game. Sequels are supposed to keep what people loved about the previous game and improve, expand, and polish. Even a more recent example I can think of is with Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and now that the game is actually out, people are loving it, but there were still people saying it didn't look different enough from Breath of the Wild before it even came out. But anyways, I digress. Jedi Survivor did exactly what I hoped it would with the gameplay, and then some. First of all, let's start with the platforming. This could probably be a lot of people's biggest issue with Fallen Order. It had some pretty basic climbing and platforming sections. The traversal had a very shallow system that I wouldn't say was bad, but it's clear not too much time was spent on it in development. And while maybe it's still not perfect in Survivor, there was so much variety and depth added to it. You get the Ascension cable on the first planet. It's a simple addition, but it made platforming less of a headache, it made everything faster, and it was incorporated well into so many platforming sections. It's hard to imagine now going back to a time without the Ascension cable, and it even gets upgraded later on. Cal's overall climbing speed is faster, you didn't have to get those claws like in Fallen Order to start climbing fast. The Force Dash was a major game changer, being able to jump farther distances or even using it to dodge out of the way of something. That dash is like straight out of the Force Unleashed, and it made traversal in general way more enjoyable for me. Plus, I think that entire section where you unlock it is just awesome. You even get flying and land mounts that are also incorporated into a few platforming sections, and the overall design for the platforming sections is so much better. Fallen Orders could get a bit repetitive because there was only so much potential with the limited amount of traversal mechanics you had. I can't tell you how many times the game had you slide down a slope in Fallen Order. While here, there's many cool and creative designs with the platforming. It just allows for so much more, and it steadily gets better and more complex throughout the game as you unlock more tools and special moves. Exact same thing with the puzzles. There's more ways to solve them, and there's more variety to their designs. For example, the Kobo Matter puzzles with BD1 or the Electro Darts, there were quite a few of these old High Republic temples that had large and complex puzzles that at times could be pretty challenging. There's even a few parkour related puzzles within these rifts or tears scattered throughout the different planets. Overall, puzzle and platforming design was better, more intricate, and more variety, and you had far more tools at your disposal to solve them. I'm excited to see how they improve on this even more in the next game, since this is supposed to be a trilogy after all. But perhaps one of the biggest overhauls and main focuses for improvement by the developers was with customization, and man, they knocked it out of the park. Obviously, a huge criticism of Fallen Order was the lack of customization for Cal, and that you could only wear different types of ponchos. I personally kinda liked the poncho look, but they absolutely understood this criticism and outdid themselves with customization. Survivor has way more outfits and different types of clothes for Cal to wear. You can customize each individual piece of clothing along with different color schemes, and you can customize Cal's hair and beard as well, which I had a lot of fun with. They knew what they were doing with putting some of these ridiculous hairstyles in there. I didn't end up changing Cal's look too much because it would be hard for me to take the story seriously if he had a mullet and a mustache all the time, but it's nice that they give you options. And I never removed the beard because I felt it helped represent Cal's growth from the first game, and that he's a bit older, more mature, and distinguished. The lightsaber customization was already fantastic in Fallen Order, and with more options for parts and different colors, it made it even better. I'm not typically someone who likes to spend a ton of time customizing stuff in games, but I was constantly changing the drip in Survivor. It's so good. Even the BD1 customization is crazy. I didn't care as much to spend a lot of time customizing BD1, but again, having the options and being able to match his colors to whatever Cal is wearing is really cool. Even being able to change the material and state of BD1 and the lightsaber to make it look polished and new or all rusted. Oddly enough though, you can't customize the Stinger Mantis, which I found strange because you could do that in Fallen Order, and I thought they might give even more options, like being able to customize the interior as well, but unfortunately, you can't customize it at all. It's not a huge deal, but it's bizarre to me. It's almost like they forgot. But of course, where you feel a majority of the improvements in Survivor Survivor comes with the combat. First things first, having human dismemberment is a big win. I had been campaigning for it ever since I played Fallen Order. It goes a long way to making lightsabers feel as deadly as they are and make you feel even more like a badass. Now, I still would have liked to be able to cut off heads and torsos. You may call me a psychopath, I don't care. I think that would be awesome, and plenty of Star Wars games in the past had the ability to do that, so hopefully in the next game they can make that happen. But I'll take the limb dismemberment only for now. Oh, and the dismemberment paired with the new animations? It's so satisfying. Fallen Order had some cool animations, but there wasn't a lot of variety to them. Meanwhile, in this game, there's so many that it never gets old slicing up enemies with a flashy and brutal finisher. The animators absolutely killed it this time around. Another thing, and I love when sequels do this, it starts you off with a lot of the skills and powers you learned in the previous game. They didn't nerf Cal and start you over with none of the cool force powers or moves you learned in Fallen Order. You pretty much start with everything except maybe a few abilities, like wrenching pole for example, but that's literally the first skill you get in that specific tree. I love when sequels do this, so thank you, Respawn. But where to even begin with the rest of the additions? Let's start with stances. In Fallen Order, you had 2 stances. In Survivor, you have 5. You start with 3, including the new dual wield stance, which again, I love that you unlock it pretty much right away. And then you get the blaster and crossguard stance fairly early on in the game. So you have them all at your disposal and choose which 2 you'd like to use. Now, this might be one of my few little tiny complaints, but I wish you could equip 3 stances instead of 2. I understand why it's 2, and I don't know how they would bind a 3rd stance onto the control scheme, but I thought that would have been awesome. Just give you more options. Again, like in God of War Ragnarok, when you get that spear, and you can switch between all 3 weapons. But it's not a huge deal, and I still loved using the different stances. I will say I wish you could refund individual skills without having to reset your entire skill tree, because by the time I got these new stances, I'd already put skill points into the ones I was using. So when I got the new stances, they felt significantly weaker than the ones I was already using, since I had no skills put into it. And it's kind of annoying to have to reset your entire skill tree every time you decide you want to put your skills into a different stance. Again, another minor nitpick, but I thought it would have been nice to refund each individual skill you unlock. But new stances aside, I really like how they improved the double blade stance. I thought the double blade was pretty weak in Fallen Order. I didn't like the moves on it. It was very close range, dealt minimal damage, and was only effective in very specific situations, like with crowds of enemies, for example. They changed the basic attacks for the double blade, and that alone made it so much more powerful. I pretty much had it equipped the entirety of my playthrough because it was so strong and useful in so many situations. My least favorite stance in Survivor was probably the blaster stance. I just didn't really like how it felt, and I felt the others were stronger. I'm sure some people feel differently. That's just my experience. But I was disappointed because the blaster stance was the one I was most looking forward to, since the concept sounded awesome. But I really enjoyed dual wield and crossguard. They were a lot of fun to use, and I like the trade-offs with both, one being heavily damaged focused while the other speed focused. They made a good contrast, and I really enjoyed having the freedom to craft my fighting style and Jedi how I saw fit. That certainly had a huge influence in making the combat overall more enjoyable and fleshed out. That paired with the massive new skill tree. Every single stance has its own skill tree, along with your force powers, and then things like your overall health and time to apply a stim. Again, you better get used to the God of War comparisons, because the massive increase in skill tree feels very similar to how much Ragnarok added on from the first game. There were so many skills that it was almost a bit overwhelming, and I'd often have to remind myself of when I got a new move or combo, because there were so many to keep track of. On top of that, they added perks as well that give you different boosts or advantages. All of it supports the freedom of building your own playstyle. And like we had hoped, there's new force powers. You can can mind trick and confuse enemies into fighting each other. You can force lift and force slam. Again, with many upgrades and special moves you can unlock for them within the skill tree. Literally every force power gets some form of upgrades, usually multiple. The force slow was changed into more of an ultimate ability that you can charge up over time. Now, admittedly, at first, I didn't know how to feel about this because I used force slow a lot in Fallen Order, and it was nice to use on just individual enemies. While in Survivor, you can slow all enemies around you, but you have to wait for it to charge up first, and without any upgrades, that can be a pretty slow process. But once you get it upgraded, it becomes insanely strong, and then when it gets paired with Cal's dark side ability, it's so powerful. I'll talk more about Cal's dark side when we discuss the narrative, but it was so fun to use in gameplay. It made me feel the true power of the dark side that I haven't felt since Starkiller. The sound effect of it also really helps you visualize what Cal is hearing in his own head. It may not be quite the ultimate power fantasy you felt as Starkiller on The Force Unleashed, but man, it has its moments. And of course, one of the biggest improvements from Fallen Order to Survivor are the enemy types. There's way more enemy types in Survivor. In Fallen Order, there were a few different types of Imperials and some creatures on each planet. In this game, I'm having a hard time even remembering every enemy type I stumbled upon. There's just so many. You have the Bedlam Raiders with all sorts of separatist droids and raiders, which I loved. This game feels like the perfect blend of prequels, Clone Wars content, and original trilogy. Hearing Matthew Wood voice the droids was amazing as always. For those who don't know, he voiced the droids in the Clone Wars series, and he was General Grievous in Revenge of the Sith. There were so many funny moments with the droids.
Droid down!
A roll of mine? This damn place. Oh, if I ever find out who made these things. All right, guard the area. There could be more of the...
Yeah, sir. Sir! Oh, so I guess this means I'm in command now.
They were a ton of fun to fight as well, with the B2s, Commandos, even the Droidicas and Magna Guards. I love that they found a way to include the droids. You eventually can get upgrades for BD1 so he can hack them and have them fight for you, like how you could with the security droids in Fallen Order, since you obviously can't mind trick droids. The Imperials have way more variants too. Seeing the Dark Troopers were particularly cool, that with all the new creatures and wildlife that Cal just continues to slaughter ruthlessly. There were 72 enemy types to be scanned in this game, compared to Fallen Order's 45. They outdid themselves once again. And even though this game has the same difficulty options as Fallen Order, I generally found Survivor to be a lot more challenging, and the enemies played a big part of that, especially the legendary boss fights. Some of those were pretty hard, specifically the Rancor and the spawn of Ogdo. If you remember Ogdo from Fallen Order. Wait, spawn of Ogdo? Isn't that the frog on Bacano in Fallen Order? How did you end up here? Oh my god, you're more annoying than Ogdo.
Several days later.
Yes! Finally! Let's go! No way. Are you actually kidding me? I need to speak with whoever thought this would be a funny idea.
So much later that the old narrator got tired of waiting and they had to hire a new one.
Do you have any idea the suffering you've caused me? Oh no, I'm not doing this. No, thank you. But there was one boss, more powerful and more difficult than them all. Perhaps the hardest boss fight in any video game ever. God, I love it when developers have a sense of humor. If you guys weren't aware, Rick the Door Technician is actually voiced by Yuri Lowenthal. You may know him as, oh I don't know, Spider-Man? They got a legendary voice actor to voice a legendary character. Respect, Respawn. I really enjoyed the legendary boss fights though. It was one of my favorite parts of exploring the planets, and you usually get great rewards for beating them too, which gives plenty of incentive to do so. In fact, many of them were harder than the main story bosses, although there were some great main boss fights. I really enjoyed the Ravis one, and of course Darth Vader, who was an actual boss we got to have a full fight with this time around. I can't wait to talk more about that later. The Bounty Hunter boss fights are back as well, except this time you get bounty pucks for killing them that you can exchange for special rewards at the shop. There's also a lot more variety to them. In Fallen Order, it was usually the same boss copied and pasted a couple times. Survivor also has quite a few sections where you're accompanied by a companion, either Bode or Marin, where they will help you fight and even have the ability to stun a targeted enemy of your choice. Again, not to sound like a broken record, but similar to the new God of War games. And I felt the companions actually felt useful, unlike most games where they typically stand there being useless. It would have been cool if your companions had a skill you could upgrade as well and get them new moves and abilities, but I still really enjoyed what we got, especially since we were always solo in Fallen Order, except for that one boss fight where Marin helped us against Malicos. Overall, the gameplay of Survivor is improved and fleshed out more from Fallen Order in every seemingly way possible. It was more in-depth, more rewarding, and even more satisfying than it already was. Huge round of applause to Respawn here. They definitely improved and added more than your typical video game sequel might.
Not a bad change of scenery. Grease's place should be around here somewhere. Yeah. Look at that.
Overall, I really like the planet selection of Survivor. Like Fallen Order, it's a good balance between already well-known existing planets within the Star Wars universe and new original ones. Having the opening on Coruscant was a fantastic idea. It looks incredible, and it's my personal favorite planet in all of Star Wars, and we don't get to typically see it around this era in the Star Wars timeline. I couldn't enjoy it in its full glory, unfortunately though, as the frame rate was not great. Still, visually it looks superb. They nailed the atmosphere and visuals with all the neon signs and lighting. The second planet is Kobo, which is by far the biggest planet. Seriously, it's like the size of some games' entire open worlds, and it serves as a kind of hub for your adventures. As you return to Kobo multiple times, and it's where you can manage your rooftop garden and peruse all the shops for unique customization options, perks, etc. I'm actually convinced I spent more time on Kobo than I did in the entirety of my Jedi Fallen Order playthrough. That's just how much content and exploration it allows for. Even now, after putting 40 hours into the game, I haven't seen everything Kobo has to offer. I'm glad they decided to focus on making the planet's worlds bigger rather than just increasing the general number of planets, because Survivor only has 6 planets total, which is actually one less than Fallen Order, but the worlds are far more expansive. And because the planets are far more open and much larger than the more linear and compact design of Fallen Order's planets, there's more traversal options to move around quicker to compensate, including land and flying mounts, on top of all the new platforming mechanics you already have. Survivor encourages a lot of backtracking as well, which creates a satisfying loop. You'll see something you can't interact with or go to in the early game, and hours later, as you progress through the game, you'll get that tool or skill necessary, and you remember that area or chest you couldn't access earlier, and can head back there and claim a reward. It creates a satisfying loop that makes backtracking almost always worth it. While I enjoyed exploration in Fallen Order, and there were some really unique hidden areas like the crashed Venator on Zepho for example, there's far more areas and quests like that in Survivor. You can find rumors by speaking with the people on the planet that almost function as side quests, some of which have some very interesting and fun stories. My personal favorite was entering this man's hidden shop and discovering a dead body in his basement, learning that the man murdered his brother as he intends for you to be next. There was nothing really like this in Fallen Order, and it made for a more engaging and in-depth exploration experience. These stories and rumors made the worlds feel more alive and like they existed before Cal stumbled upon them. There's significant history and lore that can all be read through the different data entries for a lot of the planets that we had never even seen in Star Wars canon previously. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's the legendary and bounty hunter bosses I mentioned earlier, hidden around the planets. You can recruit people to Pyloon's Saloon, you can go fishing with Scuba, play holo tactics for special rewards, and search for items like priorite shards or Jedi scrolls you use as currency in the numerous shops. Just having the freedom to explore and find some extra loot and customization is typically some of my favorite things to do in video games, and the experience was overall far more complex and rewarding in Survivor. And if you watched my Jedi Fallen Order video, you know one of the most frustrating parts about exploring in that game was the confusing map. It was kind of difficult to see where to go with the numerous paths, and there were no clear markers to distinguish the path to further the story and what was extra. Survivor essentially completely overhauled the map, adding clear main story markers and allowing you to place beacons, which paired with BD1's binoculars made it far easier to see where you were going without having to constantly check your map every few seconds. Oh, and of course there's fast travel, ensuring you don't have to waste precious time backtracking through areas you had already explored and cleared out. This is one of those rare games for me where even though I finished the main story, did tons of side content, and made a video on it, I'm going to continue to play it just for my own fun and discover everything its planets have to offer. That doesn't happen often for me. Something else I noticed about the planets and overall level design were there were a lot more shortcuts than in Fallen Order. It's a small thing, but it's a huge quality of life improvement. It made exploration and traversal less of the headache it could at times be in Fallen Order. Just another of many numerous examples of how this sequel manages to build upon the foundation established by the previous game.
It's time to set you free.
That is but one of many badass Cal moments in this game. But like I said with Fallen Order, back in 2019, to my delightful surprise, it had a very good story. It was simple but almost always focused, with strong characters, and a thrilling adventure with that insane ending facing off against Darth Vader. The ending left ample opportunity for Survivor to continue the story, and when I first discovered that Survivor would feature a 5-year time skip, I was quite surprised. To be honest, I thought the sequel would just pick up immediately where Fallen Order left off, with Cal and friends continuing to fight the Empire, but I much prefer what we got in Survivor. The time skip allows us to be reintroduced to the characters, see how they've matured, they all have new designs that better represent what they've been through, and how the galaxy has only gotten worse in the past 5 years as the Empire ruthlessly hunts down all remaining resistors. The structure of the overall narrative narrative feels quite different from Fallen Order. Fallen Order's was simple but focused. You knew who the main antagonist was right from the beginning with the second sister. You had your quest to recover the Jedi holocron of Force sensitives to rebuild the Jedi Order, and it's a pretty straight line throughout to get there. Survivor's narrative is far more complex, which has its pros and cons. The pros are you get far more characters and storylines, bringing more depth to the characters and their relationships, and it's overall a bit more unpredictable. The cons are that the narrative could feel a bit messy and a little all over the place at times, with multiple storylines, antagonists, and lacking the clear focus and direction of Fallen Order. It takes a few hours before you even really discover what the real goal or mission in the story is. And when it happens, it's something Cal just happens to stumble upon with the High Republic droid Z, and he learns about Tanalorr. The mission to get to Tanalorr didn't feel quite as dire or important to me as rebuilding the Jedi Order like in the previous game. You also don't really have a clear sense of who's the actual antagonist of this story until far later, which I don't think is inherently bad, but it's a main difference I noticed from Fallen Order. In Fallen Order, you knew the second sister was your main antagonist right from the way she was introduced at the start. For Survivor, Dagan Gera was set up in a similar way, except his character never really becomes as interesting or threatening as the second sister. For me, Dagan's character was probably the most disappointing part of this story. I thought the concept of the character was really intriguing. A High Republic Jedi who's been preserved in Bacta for hundreds of years and turns to the dark side over what happened with a fellow Jedi, Santari Khri, and the planet Tanalorr. It had the makings of a very interesting character and story, and it just never really lived up to its potential. The way they set him up in all the marketing and with his scenes really had me thinking he was the game's main antagonist. But he's killed by Cal and Bode before the game even reaches its climax. It ended up being a pretty underwhelming end for the character, but at the same time, by that point, I didn't feel like he was nearly interesting enough to carry on as the main antagonist. I just had a hard time getting invested into his whole backstory and the Tanalorr storyline. The way it was presented and told was odd to me as well. Maybe if Dagan didn't turn to the dark side immediately upon being released from the Bacta tank, or if they showed more with his flashbacks and gave a little more context to his and Santari's characters. I actually think I found Ravis more interesting, and he was Dagan's servant essentially. Having a Gendai, an immortal species, appear in the game was really sweet. I don't remember seeing one of his kind since the original Clone Wars from 2003, and I liked his character having a code of honor, but I just felt him and Dagan didn't get enough screen time, and then both met underwhelming deaths that made their story feel almost like a pretense for the real antagonist of the game. Now, when Bode was first introduced, I didn't fully understand the point of his character. They gave him quite a lot of screen time and some backstory about how he's helping the rebellion for credits to support his daughter, and he was essentially there at first to make one-liners with Cal and be a new member to the Mantis crew, so I really didn't get the point of his character, but once the climax hits, he becomes far more interesting and integral to the story. After Bode and Cal killed Dagan, I definitely noticed Bode was acting a bit strange, and I even remember thinking, now that Dagan was dead, there was no real conflict left in the story. Everything seemed way too happy. I was wondering who in the world is the actual villain here. By process of elimination, I had a pretty good hunch that Bode was going to betray us. In fact, I remember even saying it out loud to myself after that conversation between him and Cal on Jeddah, but when it happened, it still shocked me. Not only the way it happened with him killing Cordova, but also the second plot twist of him being a Jedi survivor as well. That part caught me completely off guard. I never would have guessed he was a Force user, and I really love how they delivered that plot twist with him Force pushing Cal.
If you want to keep your family safe, you get them out of there. Right now. What have you done? It can't be. survived.
It was a really well executed plot twist. You could kind of see it coming if you were paying close attention, but I doubt many saw the twist of him being a former Jedi as well. I didn't even realize that the lightsaber he was using was the one he took from Dagon until after I finished the game. But after this twist, Bode quickly shot up to being one of the best characters in the game to me. Incoming God of War comparison again here, but it really reminds me of the plot twist from Ragnarok. I won't spoil it for those who haven't played the game, but for those who have, you know what I'm talking about. It's hilarious to me how much of these games can be compared to the new God of War games, considering Stig Asmussen also used to be a big part of the God of War series. But anyways, I'm getting a bit off topic, sorry. The point is, Bode filled that role of the main antagonist that was left missing by Dagon. His character's motivations made a lot of sense. He had to work for the ISB to support his daughter, and he became corrupted by the dark side after losing his wife. A perfect example of why Jedi are supposed to forego all attachment, and there's a really strong parallel with Bode and Cal there, which made me even more concerned that Merrin would be killed off, because that would make Cal and Bode almost exactly the same. The difference in Cal's character is almost immediately noticeable in this game, with a little more grovel and age to his voice, a beard, and he's become a leader of a small rebel squad under Saw Gerrera. The growth from that scared, naive Padawan he was at the start of Fallen Order to where he is at the beginning of Survivor is quite remarkable. And I must say, I think Survivor's story did a much better job at utilizing the talents of the incredible actor behind Cal, Cameron Monaghan. While I thought Cameron did well with what he was given in Fallen Order, there wasn't a ton of opportunity to really showcase what he's capable of as an actor, and I felt that was much better displayed in this game with the wide range of emotions and trials Cal endures, specifically in Cal's fits of anger and grief. But the most important aspect to Cal's character that's put front and center right from that opening section in Coruscant is his attachment to people. He's established bonds and formed connections to people, which completely contradicts what the Jedi stand for. You see it at the beginning with his crew on Coruscant. They're killed right in front of him, and you can see the anger rise in him as he loses his nerve and tries to attack the Ninth Sister recklessly. There's a reason Jedi forego attachments. It makes them susceptible to the dark side, and the fear and pain of losing a loved one is an easy way to tap into the darkness. I mean, we saw it very clearly happen with Anakin in the prequels, and I noticed plenty of parallels with Cal in this story. He reunites with the Mantis crew, gives into his feelings for Merrin, and chooses to pursue a relationship with her, which was great to see that progress, but I was very worried for both Cal and Merrin, because you knew that if something happened to her, Cal would not hesitate to give into the dark side. That goes for everyone from the Mantis crew. When Seer is killed, you can see the anger and need for revenge brought out in Cal, where he begins to embrace the dark side, also represented by the meditation screen turning from blue to red, which I thought was a cool little detail to include. However, even though Cal taps into the darkness, he doesn't fully give into it. He kind of teeters on the edge between light and dark, like a true gray Jedi, almost like Mace Windu, maybe even a little like what we saw from Ezra in Star Wars Rebels, and I have to say, I thought this shift in Cal was really well done. It was probably my favorite part about this story. It feels like one of the more realistic ways we've seen a character battle the dark side in all of Star Wars. It reminds me a lot of what Seer went through in Fallen Order, and those moments where Cal boils over and chooses to embrace the darkness gave me full chills every time.
Get out of my way.
Another change I appreciated with Cal's character is he actually kills his enemies. In Fallen Order, Cal did not kill a single one of the antagonists. We thought he might have killed the Ninth Sister, but she obviously survived and is killed by Cal in Survivor instead, albeit in a much more brutal way, and Cal straight up executes every single one of the antagonists in this game. It goes a long way to showing a difference in the maturity and development of the character. But when that climax of the story hits, Bode sells out the hidden path, he kills Cordova, which, side note, I was very happy and surprised to see him in this game. I don't know why, but I assumed he was dead after playing Fallen Order, but it was rewarding to see him, especially since we spent so much time following his instructions in the previous game. But the Empire then invades the hidden path, Cal chases down Bode where he gets completely blindsided by his true power, and we were left to play as Cere, which was an incredible moment. She was fun to play as, and I like the contrast in her moves and abilities in comparison to Cal. Being able to heal with the Force, for example, that was really cool. And then the big part, which I really didn't see coming, was a full-on fight with Darth Vader. I said in my Fallen Order video before this game was even out that I doubted they would bring Vader back, just because I felt like they didn't want to overplay him or rely too much on a cameo or fan service, and I wasn't sure how they would top that insane ending from Fallen Order, but I was ecstatic to see him again. And well, I'm not sure if the ending itself topped Fallen Order's, the climax certainly did. This battle between Cere and Vader was absolutely epic. I saw some people complaining that Cere shouldn't have been able to mess up Vader as badly as she did, but I completely disagree. Not only has she grown significantly more powerful in the 5 years since they last fought, but she's let go of all of her fear and completely embraced the light side. Even in Fallen Order, she was able to bring Vader to his knees with just using the Force. And while Vader is probably one of my favorite fictional characters of all time and is insanely powerful, it's important to remember he's not invincible. First of all, even though he's now a Dark Lord, he's still conflicted with the light and the dark. He's not committed to one side like Cere. He's in a suit that's extremely hard to move in, and that was purposely made so by the Emperor, and he's fighting a Jedi Master who's older than him. Cere being able to hold her own against Vader makes way more sense to me than an older Obi-Wan who's been cut off from the Force for 10 years, actually beating Vader in a fight. Ironically, Survivor only takes place a few months after the events of the Kenobi show as well. So while Vader is insanely powerful and killed many Jedi, those fights were not always easy. He still kills Cere in the end, but seeing him limp away was so telling to Cere's actual strength. We don't see Vader in that state very often, and I thought it was an incredible moment. Plus the entire choreography of the duel and the fire behind Vader as he appears. He was literally on fire at one point during the fight. So badass. They definitely did Vader justice. I don't think they disrespected the power level of the character. They just showed just how powerful Cere truly was. And her last words being Cal and Trilla, really well acted and written scene. This entire climax was insane, and the ending doesn't really live up to it. I don't think it was a bad ending, it just felt a little underwhelming and anticlimactic. It didn't really feel like an ending. Typically, once the story hits its climax, it will continue to build and get even crazier by the end, which is what happened with Fallen Order, but the momentum was kind of taken out of the story after Cere's death, as getting to Tanalorr and fighting Bode was all that remained. And while I really like Bode as a character, I wasn't sure if he was strong enough to really pose much of a threat and be that final boss fight. I guess the stakes just didn't feel all that high. On top of that, I find it odd that we spent so much time searching for this compass to Tanalorr just for there to be a convenient other way by using the forced arrays once we lose the compass. It just seemed a bit contrived to me, but whatever. There were still some chill-worthy moments in that final showdown with Bode though. There's quite a debate among the community if it made sense for Bode to choose to fight Cal and Marin even after they offered peace. A lot of people think his decision to risk dying and not being able to be there to protect his daughter doesn't make much sense, but to me it made sense. Cal is going to relocate the hidden path to Tanalorr. There's a risk the Empire could eventually show up and Kata could be in danger. You also have to consider that Bode has been on the dark side of the Force for a while now, so when he asks Cal if he can guarantee that Kata will be safe and Cal can't answer, it gives him all the reasoning he needs to take the risk and fight. He's going to do everything he can to 100% ensure his daughter will be safe, because even if he does choose to stand down here, there's still a risk. So he goes for the 100% guarantee and tries to kill Cal and Marin, and I was fully expecting a moment like this where Cal is forced to tap into the dark side to save Marin. Luckily, she didn't die though, so that was a big sigh of relief, and Cal has no choice but to kill Bode. At first, I wondered why they had Cal kill him with the blaster. I thought it would have been more impactful if he like force choked him or something using the dark side to show that Cal caved, but then I remembered that Bode gave Cal this blaster towards the beginning of the story, so there's some symbolism there. In the end, I do think Bode definitely cared for Cal and even considered him a friend, but his daughter's safety took first priority, which makes sense. I think it's a good ending. I like the idea that Cal kind of lost his battle with the dark side, or rather use both the dark and the light. He gave into it multiple times in this fight with Bode, and once again, there's plenty of potential for another story after this ending, with Cal helping build up the hidden path on Tanalorr for one final fight with the Empire. But like I said, it did feel a bit underwhelming. It wasn't some insane, suspenseful roller coaster like Fallen Order's ending. Honestly, maybe it would have been better if Dagan and Ravis survived towards the end and made it to Tanalorr. That way you would have had them and Bode to deal with. I'm just not sure if Bode on his own created that big climactic ending I was hoping for. I really liked the character though, and overall, while I have my issues with this story, I still really enjoyed it. Plenty of incredible moments, the development of the characters, relationships, and bringing a level of maturity to it that Fallen Order didn't always have. It's not as tight and focused as Fallen Order's narrative. I'm not sure if any of the antagonists were able to live up to the second sister for me, but I still had a great time with it. I was sad when it was over, knowing we'll likely have to wait another 3 to 4 years for the next game. Jedi Survivor is not a perfect game. It has many notable flaws. Again, really the biggest one is the technical aspect, but man, it's a sequel done right, improving upon so much of that foundation from Fallen Order. The gameplay was the biggest area of improvement, way more depth and customization, more things to do, more expansive and detailed worlds, and a narrative, while not perfect, does a good job of continuing the overall story. And it's still some of the best Star Wars we've gotten in recent years. I think Disney could take some notes from these games. The writers have written better Star Wars stories in these 2 games than a vast majority of what Disney has done. I had a great time with it overall. I wouldn't consider it my personal game of the year, mainly because of the technical issues, but it's gotta be my favorite Star Wars game in at least like 13 years. I don't know if I can put it above the Force Unleashed games, those are very special to me, but it's certainly close. I should mention there's so many great mods for this game as well, so definitely check some of those out if you have the game on PC, but that's just my opinion of course. If you've finished Jedi Survivor, let me know your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, feel free to consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel if you're new. Special thank you to my members for supporting the channel, and other than that, thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your day, everybody.